I'm Nabil. I'll be your host for the evening. I'm one of the organizers at Essence for Agility. Just a quick background on the meetup group before we go into the topic for this evening. Essence for Agility is a community aimed to explore Essence, which is a standard that describes all the practices and methods which better enables us to pick the right set of practices to suit our context, regardless of which method they may belong to, and also to improve our application of a method. So organizations and teams have been benefiting from Essence. We've had this community now for, I think, for 2.5 or 3.5 years. The years just fly by these days, 2.5 or 3.5 years, but some years. So hopefully it's not your first time, but if it is, welcome. So tonight's event is a special one and an interesting one because we have Scott Ambler with us and Ivar Jacobson with us, and they're going to talk about how the Essence ecosystem has recently or will be soon enriched with some of Scott's own practices, and we're going to learn a bit more about the collaboration and what that means for you guys as Agile professionals and for us as an Agile industry. But before we get into some of the questions and delving into the questions that I have prepared for Scott and Ivar, I'd like to take a moment to hand over to Ivar, just for him to give a little introduction and talk a bit about Essence.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it won't be the first time. So I will start with how we started thinking in terms of Essence. That is more than, actually, it's almost 20 years ago. We looked at the world and the crazy things going on in the world. And unfortunately, many of these crazy things are still there. We still have methods war. I mean, the world at 20 years ago had different methods than we have today. But these wars were not like normal marketing wars. They were more like ideological wars, religious wars, mindset. And they are still like that. And around every method there are, at least famous ones, there is a sect of people that defend it vigorously. We have gurus behind these, and we rely on gurus instead of experts. A guru is a methodology salesperson and have probably some really good ideas, but a lot of them are incorporated from others. We have method prisons, meaning that a method is a practice is not accessible easily outside the method where it's created or incorporated. We have no common ground between methods. Well, we had no common ground between methods. And that means that if you have learned one method and want to learn another one, you basically have to start from scratch to learn the definitions of basic stuff. So this is how it all started. I was myself a guru. I felt it was ridiculous that relying on individuals so much, but that was the fact, and it was quite fun. So it's not easy to stop. Another thing we also had learned is that people don't read books. They buy them, but they don't necessarily read them. So the pleasure is that you may have to travel to talk about your content in your book at conference and so on, and that, yeah, that's fun. But instead we understood that we have to focus on the essence, the essentials, instead of trying to describe all we know. My first books definitely tried to describe all I knew about use cases and architecture, components, and so on. And it was all technical, very little about the soft softer things like the human, the social aspects or methods that Agile has introduced and really dramatically changed how we think about methods. When we worked on this to create this common ground, which is what Essence is. Essence is a common ground. You can describe, those of you who haven't seen Essence can think about Essence as a domain model for software engineering. It includes things you always want to have and always would like to think about when you develop software. Now, when we did that, we found that some killer use cases came up that we never had thought about before. For instance, the ability to create an ecosystem where people could, teams could select practices coming from anywhere, coming from any of these methods, take them out of a method prison and put them in a ecosystem where you could select the practices that made sense for you, starting at the low level. So you don't need to take a big framework. You start with what the level of competence the team have and so on, and select what you need. So we found we had killer use cases, as I call it, for teams, for complete organizations, and for the academics. So, for instance, teams could now bridge the gap between learning and doing. Most methods and methodologies are focus only on the learning aspect. And when it comes to doing, you have to sit down and think, what do I do in this particular situation? So there is no simple transition from learning to doing, and based on state, where you actually are in the project. Another very important thing that all methods are, at least the one I know, are passive. You learn them through websites or books or from classes or something like that, but you're not actively participating in it. So what Essence facilitates is that you can move from passive to active working with methods. And that is a significant improvement. We do it by being able to play games. So it's a gamification. Essence provide, thanks to that it has a language with clear semantics, it provides the ability to create hundreds of games. You don't have to rely on intuition that most other games do. You rely on a deep semantics, even if the user don't need to think about it. So Essence is a standard. We have to think a little about what does it mean to be a standard. It means that there is basically nothing controversial. There is nothing that people say, this is not of interest, that's not needed. It has gone through an evaluation of hundreds of people. It took 5 years to get it through standard. And but it's an extensible standard. So so basically, you, on top of Essence itself, you can create extensions. So you can have extensions for many different subjects. You can extensions for system engineering, for software engineering, whatever. And so that is a very important, it's very flexible. And yeah, I think that is basically, I made a little list of things I should cover here. I think I covered them all. I believe there is so much more to be said, but maybe this is enough as a start.
That was a great overview. Thank you so much, Ivar. So hopefully that gave the audience a bit of background into Essence from the co-creator's perspective, Ivar himself. So our other speaker tonight is obviously Scott Ambler. Rich history with Disciplined Agile. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with him. But Scott, why don't you tell us a bit about your background and why you're here tonight?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been working in the methodology space for decades, just like Ivar. Did a lot of work in the RUP space, just like Ivar. Also developed something called the object-oriented software process in the mid-90s, which was, I believe, the first CMM level 5 process described outside of the US military at the time. So, for whatever that's worth, but, led the development of the Agile modeling and Agile data methods, worked on something called Agile Unified Process for a bit, as well as when I was at IBM, the Basic Unified Process, I think it was called. I could be wrong about that, but anyways, and then eventually with Mark Lyons co-developed Disciplined Agile Delivery, which then later evolved into the Disciplined Agile Toolkit, which was purchased in 2019 by Project Management Institute and is now owned and taught and evolved and supported by them. So it's all good stuff. And what was interesting was both even though the or in the enterprise unified process as well. So some of those methods were meant to be standalone and had many of the problems that Ivar was just talking about. But both Agile data and Agile modeling were meant to be collections of practices that were tailored into other processes. They weren't meant to be standalone because Agile modeling addressed modeling and documentation. Many of those techniques are now commonplace in the Agile space. And Agile data was meant to be standalone to address how do you take an Agile approach to data-oriented practices and strategies on your teams. And that was a topic that was not well understood or well appreciated by Agile developers because unfortunately, the Agile developers of the time were coming, for the most part, out of the object community, which also had a huge blind spot to data issues. So that blind spot was brought directly into Agile, or at least the Agile software development space. And then the data people had a blind spot to the development issues as well. So a lot of blind spots going on there. So the Agile data method was developed to address that. And it's just now finally coming into the marketplace, really, and the techniques being popularized because the data community is being forced into reality now with the changing. They're dealing with massive amounts of data, complexity, and change, and the traditional methods just don't work for that, as we all know. So they're all looking to the Agile data stuff for ideas. So it's all very interesting.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for the overview. And I'm sure we'll get into more details about those practices, Agile modeling and Agile data shortly. But I'd like to ask you both a few questions just to get the conversation going. And audience, feel free to write any questions you have in the chat while we're talking. And if there's a particularly relevant one, I'll pluck it out and we can include it. But the first one I have for you is, so we're going to talk about your partnership today, but I understand that you two actually began your collaboration some years ago, back when you, Scott, were more directly and leading Disciplined Agile, and you were on the cusp of essentializing some practices back then, I understand. So perhaps you could tell us a bit more about what that early collaboration was like and how it went. Scott, would you like to go first?
Yeah, definitely. So when I was at IBM, so way distant past, when I was at IBM, we got involved with the CMAT effort, and I was involved as a representative of IBM to the effort that Ivar and Richard Soley and others were leading with CMAT, which then evolved into Essence. So I got involved, I guess, pretty much at the very beginning. 2010 was that? Yeah. So okay. So yeah, a long time ago. And so, yeah, and because we had a lot of similar ideas, But then after I left IBM to form what eventually became the Disciplined Agile Inc. organization with Mark Lyons, we were I started working with Ivar at his company, some of his colleagues at his company, to develop, to essentialize some practices out of the Agile data method, basically as an experiment to see how well it would work. And it worked really well. So we essentialized the database refactoring practice out of Agile data and a few other things that were closely attached to it. And developed, I think it was 24, it's 20 some odd, I think it was 24 cards describing that practice in the, in surrounding environs. And we had a really solid, and this was pre-COVID, right? So we had a really solid solution there, which the next thing that we were going to do once we had developed was to test it out and try it out in workshops. So we were just in the process of developing of revamping our Agile data workshop to use the cards to in teaching games, which we had also identified. And it was at that point that my organization was purchased by PMI, and we shelved everything that was non-DA. So including all that good work we had done in Agile data and database refactoring at the time. So so it was, so now that I've left PMI, I'm now free again to continue on with that good work. So we're starting to work together on how can we essentialize some of the practices in the Agile data method to help bring them into essence and to make them available to a wider audience and make them more trainable, more implementable.
Sounds like it was destiny that you two would get back together and pick up the collaboration. So great to hear it. Ivar, any thoughts on the early collaboration from your side?
Yeah, I mean, Scott and I had, in many ways, similar thinking. There should be an ecosystem of practices where you can select the practices you want to have for a team, an organization, and so on. So that was at the core of our collaboration or understanding that we should collaborate. What we did, we went slightly different paths later. We went to find a common ground that we actually could identify, that we could reuse when we develop our practices. And if I may, Scott went in support in teams to select practices, not only teams, organizations. And so we had a little, no, not a little, we had a lot in common. Yeah. But then we went a little bit in different directions that together made it stronger. So DA and Essence were perfect partners.
Right.
And we are now able to we have gone a long way to create this ecosystem with, as you know, many partners that have adopted Essence, Jeff Sutherland, David Anderson, the Spotify model with Joachim Sundin, and Stefan Malish, who is here, actually I saw that, has developed a whole group of architecture practices and is collaborating with the originators of these practices. So I think we are in a better situation now to really do wonders.
Brilliant. And you're right, there are a lot of similarities between DA and Essence with regard to the approach that they both take, where they help organizations create the right ways of working for them, by creating by choosing the right practices for them. And that's really what drew me to Essence to begin with, because I always believed that a company had a distinct advantage when they took the time to create that bespoke ways of working and selecting the right practices for them, rather than an out-of-the-box, let's say, generic solution. Is there anything else? Now, obviously, tonight we're not going to focus on DA, but just while we're on the topic, is there any other similarities that you wanted to take the opportunity to highlight, or any other thoughts on Essence and DA as two concepts with similar approaches?
Yeah, let me jump in on that. So yeah, there, like Ivar was saying, there's some great similarities, because we were both putting practices and strategies into context. Because we both had the same vision that you don't follow a defined prescriptive method. You end up in method jail, as Ivar will tell you. And I fully believe, I love that those collections of articles that you wrote a few years ago now on that very topic, and referenced them like 1 billion times with clients. But the thing is that you really do, you pull your techniques together to form a fit for purpose process and way of working for you, for your situation, and that evolves over time as you learn and as your situation changes. And both Essence and DA were about helping you to pick the right approach for you in your context. And that's in many, and so as a result, we were both highly motivated to reuse and reference other people's work, and which is exactly what Ivar has been talking about. Now, the ways that we did that, that's where we sort of diverged. So where Ivar was building an ecosystem of people working together and bringing their material in, we took the other approach that we pulled material in and referenced it, and just pointed to we would summarize, and then we would point to if you want to learn more about use cases, go read Ivar's book, right? And that was basically what we did. And so it was a very different approach. I think Ivar's is probably a little more scalable, but be that as it may. But it's the same basic idea, putting things into context and helping people to make better decisions as to what ways of working they should be experimenting with. So the Agile coaches will tell you talk a lot about failing fast, and certainly that's way better than failing slowly, but it's still failing. And you can put some spin on that. You can put as much spin on that as you want. But it's spin, right? Yes, you're learning something. You learned what didn't work. Well, good for you. But you know what? If you'd been a little bit smarter and use something like Essence or DA to make a better decision to begin with, you probably wouldn't have failed. And you would have succeeded a lot earlier if you had the humility to realize that somebody else has probably addressed whatever challenge you're facing today. Hundreds or thousands of people probably address that in similar situations. So maybe you could leverage their learnings as opposed to making up crap and then randomly, and then trying to experiment with it, see what works. So be smarter about the way you do process improvement. And that's really in many ways what Essence is all about, and DA as well. Let's be smarter about what we experiment with and what we try, and just reduce the failure. You're still going to fail. Nobody's perfect, but you can certainly reduce the failure rate, and that's a darn good thing. Because frankly, as a former executive, the last thing I wanted to hear were people coming to me telling me we're going to fail fast. Because I hear that rhetoric and it's like, that sounds pretty stupid to me. Should we succeed fast? Can we not up our game? And it's better than failing slowly. Okay, it's better than failing slowly, but come on, right? So the people paying the bills, they really don't like that fail fast rhetoric. Sorry, I don't mean, I hope I'm not bursting anybody's bubble, but
Agile coaches everywhere are going crazy, no doubt.
I love to hear you talk about be smarter, and because I've been working on for many years, I've been talking. One of my talks I gave probably several hundred times around the world was titled "What we don't teach you at school to be smart." And I have a number of smart cases in software engineering, and so that's a wonderful subject. But what I wanted to say, one of the key principles we adopt is that we don't take someone else's ideas and just essentialize and public it. We have, of course, done a lot of essentialization just to be sure it works. In 4 or 5 years ago, we actually essentialized SAFe 3.0 and to test that it really worked. We didn't make anything public about it, but it was a very good test. And we decided that we are not going to do that kind of things that take someone's work and essentialize it. Instead, we insist on working with the founder and essentialize, help them essentialize. But then the owner of the result is not we, it's the founder. Yeah. So they can benefit from it. We are actually working and come a long way to provide a website where people can get access to practices that are approved or designed by the founder. And the benefit of this, it's not we that should make the money on that, what they have done. We are just a media to make it available to others. But any benefit should go to the founder. So we are trying to measure the value, and hopefully we can deliver some dollar in a package to the founders. And we are totally against that you incorporate in your method a practice and you redesign it just to fit your own method prison. That is very unhealthy for collaborating with other people. So we believe partnership is key to success here. So we have, as you know, many partnership to work on moving forward with this ecosystem. I also want to say one more thing, and that is, of course, this is not everything. This is not everything a company needs. There are many other things they need. And so we partner with people who have solved other problems. Take Dave Snowden's work on Kinefin. Sorry for the mispronunciation. Kinefin. It's not easy to learn these Welsh names. And because what he does, he has a solution to help companies with complexity and get down to a level where they can identify practices that are helpful to solve this particular complex problem. Our meeting point is practices. So we help with Essent to define practices and methods, and Dave Snowden's, and he actually have a technique for that he called the hexes, which are very practical to break down a complex problem to a set of practices. It's much more so. My summary of what he has done is absolutely not complete, but we have at least a meeting point.
Yeah, and I want to jump in on that. So, having been involved with the development of several methods, and actually, I'll pick on an old method that I worked on with Mike Visdos, who's on the call, the Enterprise Unified Process. So one of the things with that was a prescriptive process, which was meant to have things tailored into it, but it assumed it was the center of the universe. And this is so it assumes that you tailor other things into EUP or tailor things out of EUP, as the case may be, to do whatever it is you need to do. But EUP is still, running the show. It's running the process show. And there's other methods. I'm not going to name any of them, but it's pretty obvious. They assume they're the center of the universe. Whereas you've got things like, Agile modeling or Agile data, where the underlying architecture assumes that you would tailor agile modeling practices into something else. It doesn't assume it's the center either, because it can't. Like it was just fundamentally assume that that was never going to be the way it works out. So it's effectively a collection of practices. So the overall the overview picture for agile modeling or for agile data is something I would call a practices map. And it's basically a conceptual model when data model when it gets down to it. It's not a process model, whereas Enterprise Unified Process was based on process models, and you had to follow that pretty much those processes, otherwise you were in serious trouble. And I think is the beauty of Essence, is that the assumption is that we're going to bring these practices together and make it easy we're putting together a pantry and make it easy to pull these practice ingredients off the shelf to put your process, your way of working together, just like we did with DA. And it's a different architecture, it's a different mindset, and it's critical. And if you want to be truly process agnostic and doing the right thing for your situation, and it does require a bit of a mindset shift, but given the nature of the world today, it's absolutely critical, I would argue.
Great. And you guys are, I think it's probably fair to say that DA and Essence were trendsetters, because we've mentioned David Snowden's Hexi. I think there's also Jürgen Appello's Unfixed model, and we're seeing more and more of these agnostic approaches that let organizations and teams tailor their ways of working and practices to suit them, rather than, as you said, Scott, be at the forefront and the center of the universe. That was a great discussion. So we reflected a bit on the past and how we got here. But of course, you have a revitalized collaboration now. So why don't we talk a bit more about that? So what does your new collaboration look like? How will it benefit the community? Are you picking up from where you left off, or starting something afresh? Ivar, would you like to tell us more about that?
I think it would be interesting to hear Scott. Sure. So if you don't mind, Scott.
Okay, stick it to Scott. Yay. Fair enough. So it's still very early days. We haven't set any sort of schedule or release dates or anything like that, so don't even ask. But anyway, so yes, there is value in rescuing the work we did around around essentializing database refactoring, without a doubt. But I think the work is going to, now, like I said, early days, we still haven't settled on what we're going to do, but or at least the schedule of what we're going to do. But in Agile data, we have something that we call the Agile database technique stack, and it's basically what are the development techniques that you use to do database stuff on a project team or on a development team. And it's the same stack of techniques that you would, if I was to ask an Agile developer, tell me about your stack of techniques. What are the practices that you follow as an Agile software developer? You'd be telling me about, we do vertical slicing, and we might do some architecture and design, and we do refactoring, and automated testing, and continuous integration and continuous delivery, and all that, because in configuration management, all that good sort of stuff. Okay, fine. So there's certain there's relationships between those practices, right? So refactoring relies on testing, which relies on CI, which relies hopefully on CD, which relies on configuration management. And it's interesting. A lot of people don't even talk about configuration management anymore. It's just sort of assumed away. But I would suggest you don't assume that away. But anyways. So the Agile database technique stack is, on the surface, insert the word data or database in all of those techniques appropriately, and it's the same basic stack. So to Ivar's point earlier, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? So automated testing is defined, continuous integration is defined, and so on. But that's what we did in Agile data, right? So we said, I don't need to redefine refactoring. I don't need to redefine automated testing and tester and development, things like that, because they're already well defined, and there's wonderful books and all this other stuff. But what I do need to define is, well, how do you do this for data? So how does database refactoring differ from code refactoring, because there's some very serious differences. And it's those serious differences that are the interesting thing. Like the concept of refactoring and a bunch of code refactorings like renaming an operation, stuff like that, still apply. But when you're renaming a column in a database, for example, whole new ballgame. Order of magnitude more complex than, say, renaming a function in your code. Easily an order of magnitude more complex. So how do you handle that? Database testing, also more difficult. I mean, it's all around the persistence of the data, right? You can't break the database, or at least you shouldn't, because otherwise people will be very angry about you doing that. So automated regression testing of a database is a different animal than automated regression testing of your code. Continuous integration, also significantly different when it comes to databases, once again, because of the persistent data. So the data aspect throws a lot of very serious challenges into all the traditional agile development techniques. And so that's what we want to focus on, the differences, right? So from a process wonk point of view, continuous database integration inherits from continuous integration, right? Because a lot of that, 90% of it is still the same, but you've got to override, a few of the minor internal practices to make it work for a database. Otherwise, it's going to blow up horrendously in your face. And it's not the developers at this point who don't know a lot about database stuff, they say, well, all we've got to do is encapsulate access to the database. Yeah, that's cute, but no, that is not the. Yes, do that. That's a good thing. Makes life a little bit easier, but that's not the issue at all. So yeah, it's a whole new ballgame, and these are all incredibly difficult. They're difficult techniques, but they're well defined. They're well known. They work, but they need to be shared more widely with the community.
And is Essence the way that you're viewing to share more widely with the community? So essentializing those practices to give them, more visibility or make it easier for people to access them? Is that the motivation?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and it's like Ivar was saying earlier, you can write as many books as you want, and both of us have, but people aren't going to read them. You need to find a way to get the information into people's hands in a manner that they're actually going to, follow and appreciate. So yeah, and I think with the ecosystem that we're seeing around Essence, both in the practitioner, go out and do this point of view, as well as the training, go out and teach this point of view, and the academic, let's teach this to the students, get them while they're young strategy. That's absolutely critical. And I think Essence is there and has a huge advantage over pretty much everything else.
I know Essence does have a big presence in academia. One of our very first events here at the meetup was with a few professors, and they were talking about how they use it on their modules and in their courses. Anything you would like to add, Ivar, about the collaboration or the motivation or the benefits that you perceive?
I think, as Scott said, we are early. We have decided that there is a perfect match, and we are planning what we are going to do. So it's too early to go into more details on that.
Yeah.
Well, then everyone's going to wait with bated breath then. We definitely look forward to hearing more about it. Is there anything else about so we talked about agile data. Is there anything else that you'll be bringing to the Essence world? Anything else you'll be essentializing?
Yeah, there's also some techniques in agile modeling that I think will get naturally drawn in at first, because there's significant coupling between agile data and agile modeling, or the agile data method and the agile modeling method, particularly around design and architecture and requirements stuff. So
yeah, what will come to the ecosystem, it's accelerating. More and more is coming. I think we have a very good friend here, Ken Pugh, who has essentialized as acceptance test-driven design, yes, one of his practice, and maybe also behavior-driven design. So we can expect to have a meetup We have not yet planned it, but we would love to have a meetup about a discussion of these practices. We are also working with Nigel Thornlove on the flow system. So we have a partnership, and we are working on essentializing the flow system. I think we have Simon Gervan here in the call, who is working directly with Nigel and John, and I can't remember the last name, sorry, but Simon, you may jump in later. That's a big task, and we have, as I said, a partnership with Nigel and his company on doing this and how we are going to make it available to other people. And there my good friend Tom Gilb is on the call too. So we are working with Tom on essentializing some of his practices. There's so many, so it's we have to start somewhere. I think we could. I could mention another 10 people that we are working with, and as I said earlier, we are not the decision maker on what the practice is. Essence is not competing with any method and so on. It is just helping to make it more accessible and easier to adopt.
Lots of very exciting practices to look forward to then. There's so many, it probably deserves, if there's not already, some sort of roadmap about what practices we could expect to see entering the Essence ecosystem over the coming months or quarters. I'm sure that would be a great thing to create, if not already.
It happens so quickly, so yes, so we will see.
Brilliant. So hopefully we've given the community a bit of info and insight about what's coming, some of Scott's practices, about how they're going to be essentialized, and some of the history there to give you a flavor about how this was in the works for some years. But now, we can't really have a conversation in this day and age without touching on AI. So I'd like to ask maybe one or two questions about that, because it's all the rage. And Scott and I had a great little conversation just before the meetup started today about AI, because he's doing a master's in AI, so it's very much at the forefront of his mind. So just generally, I would love to know both of your thoughts on how you think AI will impact the Agile industry, or even what we can do to leverage these exciting new tools that are being made available to us that we don't quite know how to use yet, or we think we know how to use, but so much potential, untapped potential. So what are your thoughts on how AI is disrupting Agile and how we can leverage it?
Do you want to start with that, Ivar? Or?
Well, I'd love to talk about it too, but you are my guest.
Okay. Yeah. So, first I'm going to give a shout out to some of Ivar's previous work on this. He really did some leading edge stuff 10 some odd years ago now, I guess, in the Wayfinder product a few years ago, and certainly with some of your new stuff. And I think AI is here to stay, and having something like Copilot. For those of you familiar with Copilot from GitHub, or the new Copilot functionality in Office 365, I guess it is. Having something like Copilot is one application of how AI can be leveraged to help you do your work, your day-to-day work. And this is certainly true in process stuff like choosing techniques to experiment with, and then getting advice on how to implement. So for example, earlier we were talking about behavior-driven development. Well, getting some advice around, that's a hard thing. It takes some skill to do it. And certainly getting some coaching advice, from a human or from an AI would probably be a good thing. Getting some advice on whether or not BD, whether or not BDD is a good thing for you anyways, also probably pretty good, either coming once again from a human or from an AI. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to leverage AI-based technologies to help you improve your ways of working and to get better at what you do. So it's going to be 3 or 4 years from now, I think we'll be calling this a classic augmentation play. So from a business point of view. And I think there are a lot of great stuff is going on, and the next few years are going to be very interesting in this space.
Yeah. So as Scott mentioned, in 2000 I founded a company, actually together with my eldest daughter Agneta, that created a product called Waypointer, which gave support for what at that time was extremely popular, rational unified process. And now we had to develop our own rule engine. We had to develop our own rule language, and we basically had to develop a lot of new technique. We were successful in that sense that many clients used it and loved it, but it came at the total wrong time. RUP went down, so it was based on RUP and it went down. And the agile movement at that time were very much anti anything AI. We were totally focused on that it was a craft to develop software. So, but we have waited, and the whole work on Essence and so on has been done so that it's AI ready. Let me say that. I'm not going to reveal what we are doing, but be clear, this having an ecosystem of practices, avoid a lot of problems to create support for AI. The Waypointer product had what we today call it's my big family that kind to call me. We had them we called it, we had co-pilots. They worked almost exactly as Microsoft described co-pilots. We call them virtual consultants. I love the term co-pilot, it's much better. So we were very close to thinking exactly like we do now. But now we are in a very different situation. We have, as I said, an ecosystem of practices, and when it comes to prompting questions, it's many of the questions are set by the ecosystem. So I think that that has to be the best I can say today.
Prompting questions. So sorry, go on, Ivar.
About this particular subject.
No, it's such a broad subject, and one of the benefits I've had, at least, is it kind of makes you better at asking questions, because you learn how to say the right prompts or provide the right bits of information to get the answer that you're looking for, which, as a coach or as an agilist can be really helpful, because that could be transferable into when you work with teams or organizations or people. Are there any other takeaways from AI, or how we can leverage it, or have you seen any examples of it in the agile industry now, or any examples of something that might be coming soon that is looking, an interesting project that might be coming along? Has agile not quite tapped into it or figured out how we can use it to, help us with our ways of working, for example?
Well, I think it's more an issue. It's not an issue of agility per se. It's more an issue of applying AI-based tooling to improve your way of working, to augment what you're doing, and sometimes, I hate to say it, but also replace people, which many of the Agile people you probably not like the sound of, but that's the reality on the ground, right? The organizations are adopting AI, and they're justifying some of the expense of doing so with the hope of reducing their overall employment footprint. That's, regardless of what the AI protagonists, of which I am one, will tell you. The fact is, people are going to be replaced by robotics and AI, and we've seen it happening, and we will continue to see it happen. And at the same time, there will be a lot of augmentation. And I think from an Agile point of view, it's the helping augment people doing their jobs and doing whatever it is that they're doing. Using AI, some sort of automation is definitely the go. If you look at how the AI or how the Agile community has evolved over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of really cool tooling developed, and a lot of the technical, particularly around the technical practices, and that sort of stuff will continue. And I think as Agile practitioners, we should be aware of the realities of AI. Some of those learnings is that your approach to testing is going to change. So, for example, if you're on a machine learning project, one of the things that you've got to do is you pull, you've got your training data, and you go through training, you do all the training, and that's the development process. But you have to pull some of your data out. So, like 30% of your data will be put aside for your final test run. Because the problem with machine learning is the machine learns. So when you run your data, when you run it against new data, it learns from that. Like depending on the way you're doing things, it's going to learn from your test run. So the next test run, even though it's on the same data, will be different because the machine has learned. So that has some interesting implications from an Agile point of view, well, from any point of view, but certainly from an Agile point of view. So some of the Agile, the things that we know and believe in to be true in the Agile community will not work as well as we think on an AI project. And that's okay. Do the right thing, right? It's, let's do what's best for the situation at hand rather than the official Agile way of doing things. Break out of method prison. Break out of Agile method prison would be my advice on that one.
Brilliant advice, of course. That was really insightful, and augmentation. I think that's probably that makes total sense about how we might be seeing AI integrated into how we work and what we work on. Thank you so much for answering my questions. I'm conscious of the time, and I wanted to give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions that might be on the forefront of their mind. So, guys, we have Scott and Ivar here. Would you like to spend the last few minutes asking them any questions about any of the things we've discussed so far? Any questions you have on your mind? I can see the chat is very busy, lots of discussions, but I'll just pause for a few seconds to see if anyone has a question. Feel free to use the raise hand feature on Zoom or ask it in the chat if you can't talk right now. Either option works for me. Or if anyone else has any insights on AI, I'd love to hear your insights as well.
Yeah, I noticed in the chat, Tom Gilb has mentioned that, I assume it's him giving a talk in Oslo at the Big Data Conference. This is a huge topic in the AI community. It is data quality, or a lack of data quality, is the big showstopper for most organizations right now. And this is not an easy problem to deal with because they've been letting it. Their data technical debt has been building for decades, and now they got a mighty big cleanup to do.
We wish you could hold a talk about that in Oslo tomorrow.
Well, talk to me later. It's one of the things I'm focusing on. It's a horrendous problem, and the answer is a lot of hard work. There's no easy kill on this, which is why it hasn't been dealt with in most organizations, right? The data technical, and I'm going to ding the Agile community a bit on this. We have not had a coherent discussion around data technical debt. We talk a lot about technical debt, which is good, but as usual, data tends to be a blind spot for the development crowd, and it's the data technical debt that's almost always more serious than the code technical debt. Not always, mostly, but it's certainly biting everybody in the ass right now, and will for the rest of this decade. So I invite people to do a little bit of thinking around that, and a lot of work.
So
it's a lot of hard work.
I have a question. This is a thought thing. Since in behavior-driven development, we try and define all the scenarios of behavior of a system. It's not perfect, but if you did that and you let the AI write the code that matched that behavior, will we care about what the code actually looks like? Because when we add a new requirement, we add a new scenario, and we simply regenerate the code that matches all that behavior.
Maintenance is gonna burn you. So it'll be adding a new behavior is probably not the issue. I would assume, but changing existing behavior is probably not going to be pretty. Just like changing an existing behavior is not pretty if you hand coded it too. But I think the auto-generated, like having been burned many times in the past with generated code, the fancy new tool of today generating code, yeah, it's gonna, some things will be really easy, some things will be horrendously difficult. But I would say the same thing of human handcrafted generated code too. So yeah, I don't think it's the push the magic button is never as easy as people claim. And it might work out really well for that system that you generated, but what about all the other systems in your organization that you didn't generate that way, that you have to integrate with and share other things, you have to share other things with, because all that stuff's changing not quite so nicely as your stuff is changing. Assuming you've got the magic system and the magic button and it all works out well, that's great for that environment. Everything else is still going to be a disaster, and you've got to work with that too. So yeah, there's no easy solutions on. I don't think I've had easy solutions. I've had people trying to sell me easy solutions now for almost 40 years. Good for them. Yeah, good for them. I still await the magic solution.
Hopefully one day.
Yeah, things get better. Don't get me wrong, things get better. But the problem space tends to evolve just as fast as the solution space, if not faster.
Thank you for the question, Ken.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Tom, did you have something?
No more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else anyone would like to share?
Yeah, I can bring up something here that I have been thinking a lot about. It seems like basically all the known thought leaders agree about the crazy things. They agree on it, but what I'm missing is that they basically do something. They accept that it's crazy to have methods war, it's crazy to have method prisons, it's crazy to have gurus, it's crazy, and so on, and that we don't have a common ground. But for some reason, they are quite quiet. Apart from the people we know have adopted essence. So I wonder if anyone has an idea about why is it like that. I mean, I can understand that if you have your own method, you have your hands full in selling that and don't want to worry about anything else. I can understand it's you need to have a solution to the problem, otherwise you may not be interested to talk about it. But could there be something more fundamental?
Sounds like Ivar has set out a challenge for us. There was some interesting bits in the chat that related to that, but I can't find it now, but definitely a topic that I think is on other people's mind as well. So I think this is a great point to conclude our discussion. I'll just give one final opportunity for Ivar or Scott to share anything before we close.
We have...
Go ahead.
Okay, since you have a guest, I should let you go, but we have Simon Gervin has in the chat window several of the things you can read to learn more about Essence and what problem Essence solves, and what are the killer use cases of Essence. I think he now summarized, put them all together in one message. So at least we can leave something behind us today.
Thank you so much, Simon.
And you're most welcome to come and talk to me about any question. I've seen there have been some questions. I have focused to participate in this meeting. So please send me email. It's quite easy to find my email address. Or maybe someone can publish it. Ivar@ivarjacobson.com.
Very easy to remember indeed. But thank you, Simon, for all the links. Very helpful. And yeah, I'm sure everyone knows how to get in contact with Ivar. Scott, any closing remarks from you?
Yeah, I think to Ivar's earlier point, or earlier question, I should say, why would you want to be involved with Essence? And I think for me, the answer is to help share the material more widely and make it more maintainable, actually, from my point of view, and to leverage the great work of others. So, like I said, I don't want to reinvent the TDD wheel. I'd rather leverage Ken Pugh's great work on that, which I've done in the past and will continue to do. I don't need to. What I do want to do is fill in some details that are on the data stuff, because a few things do in fact change, and that's okay. And so I think I would invite other methodologists or aspiring gurus or whatever we would call ourselves to think in this way, right? So how you can speed your work up, you can increase the quality of your work and the reach of your work by leveraging, by standing on the shoulders of others and leveraging existing stuff and making it available more widely. Because I think that's going to be the name of the game going forward. Is doing more of a creative. I don't want to call it Creative Commons, but like more of a how do I share. Sharing your material and open sourcing it basically, and making it available to a wider group of people to leverage in their own work and to do training and practitioner stuff and all those good sorts of things. And I think there's a lot of really good value in doing that. It's easier said than done, of course, but I would ask people to think seriously about it. So if you're writing a book or have written a book, then maybe think, how can I bring those great ideas and share them more widely beyond the pages of a book, or a training course, or whatever you develop. I think there's a lot of value there.
Brilliant. And yeah, you're spot on. That is one of the great benefits of Essence, and hopefully that's what our community is getting from it currently. And the added value that they'll get shortly will be the lovely practices that you're going to integrate with it. So thank you so much, guys. Ivar, Scott, as always, it's great to have you on. I hope this was very insightful for me personally. I hope it was for our audience as well. This is always the part where I do my very awkward virtual round of applause. So if anyone wants to unmute and join me in my awkward virtual round of applause. There we go. We had some virtual clapping with the emojis as well, so that counts. But Scott and Ivar, thank you so much. Audience, thank you so much as well for taking the time out of your evenings or mornings to be with us. And you can watch out for the recording in a few days to recap on anything we've discussed here. So have a great evening and have a great day. And I hope to speak to you all soon. Ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye.